Find out what the baby is doing in her mother's womb throughout the 9 months of pregnancy. In 9 months, a fetus goes from a tiny embryo to a very chubby baby. While still in the womb, he already has certain characteristics that will remain with him for life. For example, it is possible to find out before birth whether the baby will be right-handed or left-handed, and which foods he will prefer. A lot of things happen in the belly of a mother, and at Sympa, we propose you to make the trip of 9 months with us, from conception to birth. First trimester of pregnancy. 1-2 weeks. And here we go for a long trip. During the first 4 days, the future being is smaller than a grain of salt. Its size is only 0.14 millimeters. However, from the 5th day, she begins to grow, and the 6th day, she almost doubles in size, up to 0.2 millimeters. On the 4th day, the embryo migrates to the uterus, where it will be for the next 9 months. On the 8th day, he is implanted in his wall. 3-4 weeks. Find out what the baby is doing in her mother's womb throughout the 9 months of pregnancy. Embryo at the 4th week of pregnancy. On the 20th day of pregnancy, more or less, a very important event occurs. A neural tube appears and becomes the spine and future brain of the child. His heart begins to beat on the 21st day, and all the important organs are formed, such as the kidneys and the liver. The eyes are not yet in the normal position. The bubbles, from which they will form later, are on the sides of their heads. At the end of the first month, the embryo has a circulatory system. The spine and muscles begin their development. 5-6 weeks. Find out what the baby is doing in her mother's womb throughout the 9 months of pregnancy. During the 5th week, the hands and wrists develop, although it is still difficult to distinguish the fingers. His little arms and little feet are already able to bend to the joints. It is at this point that the external genitalia begin to form, but it is still impossible to see if the baby is a boy or a girl. The embryo has already grown significantly, up to 10,000 times its original size. The baby's face is already starting to form. The eyes begin to take on a slightly more human form, but they will remain closed for a long time. 7-8 weeks. During the 7th week of pregnancy, the fetus begins to move, although its mother still does not notice it, and the fingers and toes become almost similar to those of adults. At this point, the embryo develops basic milk teeth and a reproductive system. The kidneys also begin to produce urine. Although the size of the fetus is only 2.5 centimeters, he begins to acquire his own facial expressions, and his eyelids, as well as the tip of the nose, become more defined. 9-10 weeks. Find out what the baby is doing in her mother's womb throughout the 9 months of pregnancy. Embryo at the 9th, 10th week of pregnancy. At this point, the baby has already grown a lot. Its weight is 4 grams and its height is 2 to 3 centimeters. Despite its small size, the brain is already divided into 2 hemispheres, and the baby teeth and taste buds begin to form. The tail and the membranes between the fingers disappear, and baby begins to swim in the amniotic fluid, moving even more actively, although the movements remain imperceptible to the mother. That's when the hair starts to grow. 11-12 weeks. The child's genitals then begin to develop so that their gender can already be known on ultrasound, although the probability of error is still high. The baby has a strange appearance, resembling a bit like an alien. He has a big head and a tiny body, but his face is already similar to that of an adult. The ears are almost in the right position, the eyebrows and eyelashes begin to emerge. The cartilages, which form the skeleton, ossify little by little. New blood vessels appear and the production of hormones begins. At this point, the baby continues to grow and is approximately 6 centimeters tall and weighs approximately 20 grams. 13-14 weeks. Embryo at the 14th week of pregnancy. Although the child's head is half the size of his body, his face is more like that of an adult. The premises of about 20 milk teeth are already formed in the mouth. The child can already put a finger in his mouth, but he will learn to suckle a little later. Due to the active formation of the vessels, the baby's skin is red and very thin, and his body is covered with lanugo, a very fine down that covers the entire body of the fetus, with the exception of the palms of the hands and plants feet. This down is necessary to protect it from hypothermia. Second quarter. 15-16 weeks. During the 15th week, the baby grows up to 10 centimeters and gains weight. He weighs about 70 grams. Although the eyes are still quite low on the face is already recognizable. In addition, the child begins to grimace because the facial muscles are well developed. It also happens to suck a finger, and the sebaceous and sweat glands begin their work. 17-18 weeks. The ear canals are formed, so that the child can successfully distinguish the sounds and hear the voice of his mother, and most importantly, recognize it. In addition to the baby teeth, the molar bases appear, the bones form and begin to harden. The bones of the skull will remain mobile until birth, while the baby will cross the birth canal, the passage between the vaginal orifice and the cervix. They will overlap to facilitate the birth of the baby. At this point, the mother finally begins to feel the movements of the baby, which is already about 14 centimeters and weighs 190 grams. 19-20 weeks. Embryo at the 20th week of pregnancy. Even if the child's eyes are still closed, he already knows the surrounding area very well. It is now also possible for us to understand whether the future child will be right-handed or left-handed, as he begins to use his dominant hand more actively. Fingerprints appear on the baby's fingers, which is another unique brand of each of us. The child also begins to be able to distinguish the day of the night and is only active at a certain moment. 21-22 weeks. The 21st week is when the baby starts to gain weight by forming subcutaneous fat. Soon, wrinkles and fine lines will appear on their arms and legs, and in week 22, neurons will form for life. The child will then open the eyes, which will begin to move almost like those of an adult. 23-24 weeks. During the 23rd week, the child begins to dream, and his face is perfectly modeled. It can be seen on ultrasound. His skin becomes more opaque, his eyes open longer, and he even reacts to the light. Besides, too much brightness can frighten him. During the 24th week, the baby is about 30 centimeters tall and weighs half a kilo. 25-26 weeks. It is in weeks 25 and 26 that the taste buds of the baby develop definitively. By swallowing and inhaling more and more amniotic fluid, the fetus is initiated to the tasting, and his preferences for certain foods can be seen during ultrasound. Indeed, it will change face expression, make changes in its suction and also salivation. The fetus will also learn to blink, and you can see them a little, although they were very vague. Third trimester. 27-28 weeks. Embryo at week 27-28 of pregnancy. If you do an ultrasound at this time, you can see how baby smiles and sucks his finger quite intensely. At that moment, the baby has his first toy, his umbilical cord, and he curiously studies his body. At the end of the 7th month of pregnancy, the child develops the individual metabolism that he will have throughout his life. The baby is already big enough. He weighs 1.2 kilograms and measures 35 centimeters. 29-30 weeks. Find out what the baby is doing in her mother's womb throughout the 9 months of pregnancy. The baby in the 30th week of pregnancy. The layer of subcutaneous fat increases and the baby becomes bigger. He already knows how to cry, cough, and sometimes hiccups. This happens when he ingests too much amniotic fluid. During the 30th week, the child's brain is already so developed that it is able to remember and analyze information. 31-32 weeks. That's it, he already has his 5 senses, and his daily diet looks more and more like the one he will follow after his birth. The child hears the organs of his mother who are at work and knows his voice perfectly. He will be able to distinguish it from all other people immediately after birth. The baby's immune system starts to produce antibodies that protect against all types of infections that can affect it in the first days of life. 33-34 weeks. The subcutaneous fat has already formed and the lanugo has finally disappeared from the fetus. The child has grown enormously. He is about 40 centimeters tall and his weight is around 2 kilograms. The baby's nervous system is already fully formed, but the lungs are still under development. 35-36 weeks. Find out what the baby is doing in her mother's womb throughout the 9 months of pregnancy. Baby yawning. 3D ultrasound, 36th week of pregnancy. At this point, the fetus looks almost exactly like it will be at birth. It is still quite thin, but the layer of subcutaneous fat is growing more and more. The nails and hair are already completely formed, and it becomes so big that it has almost no space to move. It is therefore more and more immobile. 37-38 weeks. The baby's training process has finally come to an end. He is now ready to come into the world, and midwives consider it a term pregnancy. The lanugo can occasionally remain on the hands and legs of the fetus. Since there is almost no place in the womb, the mother may feel that her baby is starting to move more intensely. The strength of his blows increases because the child's muscles are fully formed, so he is very strong. 39-40 weeks. Find out what the baby is doing in her mother's womb throughout the 9 months of pregnancy. The first minutes after childbirth. The lungs of the child continue to grow to the end. It is only at the time of birth that they secrete the right amount of surfactant, a substance produced in the lungs that allows them to stay open while breathing. The baby will then announce his birth with his first cry and then begin his long journey through a vast and interesting world. Have you ever been pregnant? Or maybe you are now? Did you know all these different stages? Do you have other things to tell about your personal experience? We would be happy to read all of this in the comments below. It is important to share this video with other women to know this information. Thanks, see you soon.